One of the storylines that we've been following is the pretty dishonestly edited and cropped and cut and spliced, etc. videos of President Joe Biden. And they're supposed to characterize him as confused and not knowing where he is. And as I've now told you in a few segments, we went through that in detail one by one and showed the ways that they were being dishonestly presented. But another thing I told you in a past segment was that sometimes as a rebuttal or response to those attacks, other people go, okay, we want to play this game. We want to air out the dirty laundry of the candidates. Let's go through Trump's confused past. Now, before playing this brutal video of, as it's described, 3 minutes, let me see if I can actually get the correct thing pulled up. Here are 3 minutes straight of Donald Trump confusing and forgetting people's names, the names of cities he's in, and more from MediasTouch. Then we'll look at some testimony from an individual who was disturbed by the confusion of Trump in personal conversations. But I do want to caveat it because we're all about logical consistency here, that whataboutism is not an effective refutation of an argument, right? So if someone says Biden's disoriented and confused, it's not on its own disproving that to say, well, Trump's also a cognitive West, right? That's why we took the story of Biden by itself, analyzed it. Oh, this doesn't prove anything that they're saying. It's actually really dishonest. A lot of these moments were him trying to have a good human moment with someone else, but they cut out the other person, so it looks like he's interacting with nobody. And so you have to take it on its own merit. That's what we did. Just like the allegations that Republicans make against Biden about corruption, saying, well, Trump is corrupt isn't a good response by itself. Instead, we refute that by itself and then move on to, and if you want to talk about confused presidential candidates, let me introduce you to Donald J. Trump, who the experts have been saying is disturbingly cognitively struggling. Here's just some examples. We look a lot at the glitches. Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat you, right? Gosh, I've gotten that down. But we haven't looked as much at the name flipping. And this is more that, getting the names wrong and stuff like that, because that's a lot of what they'll go after Biden for. Here it is.
I think you should take a cognitive test like I did. I took a cognitive test and I aced it. Dr. Ronnie Johnson. Does everyone know Ronnie Johnson, congressman from Texas? He was the White House doctor. How good did Elise Stepanek do? You know, we've endorsed Dr. Oz. We've endorsed JP, right? J.D. Mandel, and he's doing great. Jimmy.
That one was a doozy. He called the person JP, then went, it's not JP Vance, it's J.D. Mandel, which the other person's last name was Mandel that he was running against. So he merged the two people competing and said, we're endorsing J.D. Mandel, which is a very confusing endorsement because it's both people.
Connors is Jimmy Connors is good. He's also happy.
Mike Bolton, John Bolton is here. Mike Bolton, as you know, is in Russia.
And there was progress today. I look forward to solving it.
Thank you, Steve. It was Trump's fault. It's always Trump's fault. Can it ever be like Rick Gates' fault? I mean, it's always Trump's fault, Rick. By the way, they never report the crowd on January 6th. You know, Nikki Haley. You know, did you know they destroyed all of the information, all of the evidence, everything? Deleted and destroyed all of it. All of it. Because
like
of
Haley.
Lots of things. Like Nikki Haley is in charge of security. We offered her 10,000 people. We have some of our great business leaders and leaders, period, right behind me. I may ask Marilyn Lockheed. We appreciate it.
This is my favorite category. He takes the name of the person and merges it with the company that they work for. So this is Lockheed. Then he calls Tim Cook Tim Apple because he's the CEO of Apple.
We appreciate it very much, Tim Apple. Yes, please, Mr. Kurd.
Thank you very much for your time.
You know, is it?
Did he call him Mr. Kurd? And he's a Kurdish reporter? A little insight into the brain of Trump. Mr. Kurd.
Yes, please, Mr. Kurd.
I'm going to quickly pause your viewing of this video to ask that you subscribe to the channel if you're not already, just by clicking that subscribe button. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time.
You know what was interesting? Joe Biden won against Barack Hussein Obama. Has anyone ever heard of him?
Arrest their leading political opponent, and leading by a lot, including Obama. I'll tell you what, you take a look at Obama and take a look at some of the things that he's done.
And Putin, you know, has so little respect for Obama that he's starting to throw around the nuclear word today. You've heard that, nuclear.
Thanks for giving your first comments on the bill on this show. It means a lot to us. We appreciate it, sir. Thanks a lot.
You have a deal. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Joe Bright, this guy is just the worst. So will Christian ever run for president against you? And you heard the prime minister, you heard Netanyahu. Maybe have Matt Blum speak next, because he's been so incredible in so many ways. He fights so hard. He loves his stadium.
Everyone's looking around. Who is it? I like Netanyahu.
He loves the people. Think of it, a new branch of the United States military, United States Armed Forces, called Air Force. I never talked about that. That's something we never talked about. But what we just saw, we just left pleasure. A very big hello to a place where we've done very well, Sioux Falls. Thank you very much, Sioux Falls. And thank you. So, Sioux City, let me ask you, and the worst president in the history of our country who is cognitively impaired, we would be in World War II very quickly. The worst president in the history of our country will be a fading nightmare. He'll be a fading, I have fading memory.
Incredible. And that, again, is just one category of gaffes we played in a recent breakfast brief. Other categories of glitches and struggles, and he does that thing where he can't get a word out, so sort of his body starts twitching, and then he just gives up on it and moves on, like the Saudi Arabian Russia will redo. And it's rough. So my question to Fox News, to those who so desperately want to portray this caricature of President Biden, why is it that these moments don't rely on you dishonestly cutting, clipping, manipulating, cropping them for them to look bad, but seemingly you rely on that to make Biden look bad? A classic example that we talked about recently was Biden thought everyone was about to sit down, so he sort of went like this, and then 2 seconds after they cut off the clip, everyone sits down in their chairs, but because his body, based on the camera angle, was blocking the chair, him going like this for a few seconds looked like he was trying to sit where there wasn't a chair, and then they cut the clip right before you could see that there was a chair, and then everyone was roasting Biden for trying to sit in an invisible chair, an imaginary chair, with this whole narrative, and it was just based on a complete deception. And so it's not to say that Biden doesn't make his own mistakes. He does. And we've talked about aging, as Biden is and Trump is going to cause natural things in the way that you articulate yourself, in the way that you present, and that is a given for sure. But what the experts have said is that that actually doesn't necessarily impact one's critical thinking skills, their intellect, their wisdom that comes from experience and all of that. What you have to look for is the type of brain deterioration that does impact one's critical thinking skills, decision making, and it seems that that's showing up in Trump's situation in a way that it's not with Biden's, as shown by, and this is a really good point that we talked about in a past segment from Mark Cuban, the billionaire who is now advocating on behalf of Biden's reelection, and he was saying that a good indicator of which person you should be more concerned with cognitively is that not a single person has come out of Biden administration saying that there was anything for them to be concerned about with the way that he handled crises, the way that he dealt with complex situations, whereas dozens have left the Trump administration and gone, this guy is cognitively unfit to be in the White House. He can't comprehend these things. And that should concern people. And as I said before, I used to sort of wonder, why then do more Americans find themselves being concerned with Biden than Trump? And I think it's because of our obsession as a culture, as a society, with surface level stuff, aesthetics, right? And so because Biden's aging is just sort of your generic speaking quietly, mumbling here and there, walking in a sort of, I don't know, shuffly way, that is more compelling and noticeable to people than Trump shouting his glitches, right? Because he's energetic and he's shouting, but then he's having really disturbing moments like where he says Nikki Haley 4 times while he's trying to say Nancy Pelosi. Those don't actually sit with people the same because it's less visually, aesthetically disturbing, even though it actually indicates, again, according to the psychologist that we cited in that past video, it's more concerning for what it means about his brain, the types of glitches that Trump is having. And also you have a right-wing media echo chamber that is dedicated to pumping out 24/7 pro-Trump propaganda. But then because of the incentive structures we talked about before, that doesn't show up on the left in an equal way. So it's not balanced. You have that unequal playing field. And to prove that they are unbiased, you'll have CNN doing round-the-clock coverage also of Biden's age. And so that plays into it as well. On this, Ramin Sudhita, he sat with Trump extensively, interviewed him right after Trump left the White House. And now that he's releasing a book, he's sharing some of his experiences, and some of it had to do with Trump's cognitive issues. Take a look at this.
The other thing that I think is really interesting, because I really got to know Donald Trump post-presidency, and I got to see what he was like. And over the weekend, he was talking about how Joe Biden needs to take a cognitive test. Joe Biden, isn't all there. Donald Trump had severe memory issues. As the journalist who spent the most time with him, I have to say he couldn't remember things. He couldn't even remember me. We spent an hour together in 2021 in May, and then a few months later, I went back to the White House. I went back to Trump Tower to talk to him about his time in the White House, and he had this vacant look on his face, and I said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "No." He had no recollection of our lengthy interview that we had, and he wasn't doing a lot of interviews at that time.
Donald Trump.
And yeah, you have that. Then, aside from his memory issues, you have him apparently cosplaying as president.
What were your biggest takeaways from sitting down with him? Right after he left the White House, when his political power is probably the lowest it's been since 2015, and how he reflected on when he was hosting The Apprentice. And the ratings were soaring in that first season, and just kind of what that looked like for him.
He was very deflated. He was conflicted. He was angry about the way in which the press had treated him. He still believed that he won the election. And he was happiest when he talked to me about hosting The Apprentice. It was the thing that brought him the most joy. We watched clips of the show together. We watched the theme song, and he really lit up. He watched his firing of Omarosa. And then he would talk about what he did at the White House, and he would become gloomy and resentful and unhappy and refer to Afghanistan and Joe Biden. But he also seemed to think that he still had some foreign policy powers. And there was one day where he told me he needed to go upstairs to deal with Afghanistan, even though he clearly didn't.
He told you that while you were interviewing him at Trump Tower, he told you he needed to go upstairs to deal with Afghanistan?
With the, quote, the Afghanistan is how he referred to it.
It's a remarkable experience.
Can someone tell me what on earth Trump could have meant by that? I need to go deal with the Afghanistan? What do you mean you have to deal with it? You have to go watch Fox News coverage about it? What are you dealing with? That is really strange. And that actually gets to what some people have wondered. Why? I had someone in my life ask me this recently. Why, Luke, they said, did Trump hold on to those classified documents? Okay, you have them, as we saw with Biden and with Pence. It's a mistake. You didn't know about, and then you turn them over. Fine. First 15 boxes that Trump did turn over, he wasn't charged for, just like Pence and Biden. He was treated the same. But then he decided to, after knowing he wasn't supposed to have the additional boxes, engage in a criminal conspiracy to keep them out of the hands of the government. And why would he do that, risking prison time? I think part of it, and my answer was to this person, part of it is I don't think he thought he could be held accountable. And he felt like it was an offense to him to be forced by the government that he no longer has power over to hand over documents that he felt were his because he was president. I'm still really the president. And this too, it's sort of like he wanted to believe he still had some power and authority and extra classified knowledge, which he could feel when handling these documents. And by handing them over, he was admitting, conceding that he was no longer anything but a private citizen and former president, but no longer the president. And maybe that's why he put himself in legal jeopardy, just to continue cosplaying. Which sounds silly. How could he possibly do that? But hearing this experience with Trump, of him just sort of sadly playing old Apprentice clips and then going and dealing with the Afghanistan as a non-president, maybe that's exactly what it was. Here's a little bit more from the same author.
It's really important, I think, for people to read this book, to hear in Donald Trump's words what he thinks his accomplishments are, what he thinks he's capable of, and how little he actually cares about governing. He's only interested in show business.
In terms of his accomplishments, this is from the book. He's looking at a page from the Nielsen ratings published in a 2004 issue of Variety from the week after the airing of The Apprentice's first season finale. Let me just say, as a person who has some familiarity with Nielsen ratings, like, talk about ephemeral. Like, no one, it doesn't matter. No one cared. Like, they don't matter the day after, okay? It's framed and bolted to the wall, something that seems to carry as much value to him as the U.S. Constitution, if not more. This sheet of paper comes from America where The Apprentice was, if only for a single week, the #1 show. This is my whole life, Trump says.
And he said it with a straight face, and he meant it. And this is a former president of the United States looking back on Nielsen ratings from 20 years ago that he has framed not only his office in Trump Tower, but when I visited him in Mar-a-Lago, there's also a copy of the Nielsen ratings framed there. Ratings are what drives him. Audience is what is important to him.
Why?
What a sad, sad state of affairs. This is my whole life, Trump said about ratings, which we've seen publicly. Sometimes he'll say the ratings were bad on things that don't have ratings. He's obsessed with what became in his mind an indicator of popularity. It's sort of like, you know, when growing up, you have those people who far too late into their life were concerned with the term popularity, sort of in a social sense. If someone was popular, or you get out of quote unquote grade school and people want to know, were you popular in high school? And it's sort of like, what is that requires care about something that seems so unimportant, especially as you grow older? That's Trump. He wants to be the popular kid in high school. At age 78 now, right? And a former president. He used to be in charge of the nukes. And he still wants to be the popular high school kid. And ratings became that for him. Instead of reflecting on the accomplishments for the American people, because there weren't any, but let's say that he felt like he had some, he was still reflecting on ratings from 20 years in the past. This is the alpha male that MAGA is coalescing around. Very strange. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. And if you want to get access to the daily bonus show, you can do so by clicking that join button below.